Thanks everyone, and thanks for reading that so beautifully, Anne. That was great. So we're going to be looking at these two passages and thinking about friendship today. I'm literally going to go through each verse of that first passage. I'm going to break that up into 4 shorter talks so that we can all concentrate after a busy weekend and so that we might all engage in with it. I wonder, how you communicate with your friends. I was looking at, I've got 2 very close female friends, and we often send each other cards to just honour each other and to bless each other and to pray for each other. But we're running out of cards to send to one another, so I was having a look online to see what kind of cards you might send to your friends. So these are what I found. So this is definitely true of my oldest friends. They have to stay my friends because they know all my secrets. And I know theirs. And you might have friends like that. Next one. Good friends don't let you do silly things on your own. Well, I think I can say that about my really close friends. We've done some pretty silly things together. You might have friends like that who, she's off again. Or he's off again, but that's all right. I'll come and do that with you because you're my mate. I'll do that. Next one. We've been friends for so long, I can't remember which one of us is the bad influence. Well, in my friendships, I know exactly who is the bad influence, although maybe they would say the same about me, so who knows. And then the last one, friendship saving us a fortune in therapy. It does seem like quite a lot of the cards you want to buy for friends are very female based, actually. I think, sometimes women are better, I don't know, at saying to their friends, I love you, you're really important in my life. I think men maybe struggle a bit more with that. Is that a fair thing to say, chaps in the room? And yet what we've got in this story today is an absolutely beautiful model of friendship, which we're going to look at together. You need to think about what we really value in a good friend. Maybe it is that they know all our secrets. There's something lovely, isn't there, about people you've journeyed with in all of your life? I know my 2 closest friends. There's something lovely about the fact that they've known me since I was 18. They're 2 friends that I made when I started my nurse training. They know how ridiculous I was at that age. They know all the stupid things I've said. Life is very black and white when you're 18, isn't it? Sometimes you look back on your 18-year-old self and shudder, don't you? I vehemently disagreed with women in ministry when I was 18. Just shows you God has the last laugh, doesn't it? But they know all that stuff. And I often say to them, one of the things I love most about you as my friends is that you still loved me when I was that obnoxious 18-year-old. Which means that, you've journeyed with me. That's really important to me. And they've chosen to stick with us when we've done something silly, maybe. Or maybe we've all been someone else's bad influence. And I hope we all have at least one friend with whom we can share our deepest joys and sorrows. The other wonderful thing about those friendships that we've had with my 2 friends and their husbands now is we've journeyed for so long with each other. We've been through some of the most awful things in our lives together and some of the best things, and we don't have to explain that to each other. There's a real gift in that, isn't it? Not having to explain those things to our friends. But the friendship we're reading about today seems to be perhaps even deeper and more honourable than any of those things. These 4 verses tell us what friendship can be, both good and bad, I would suggest. And maybe we'll recognise some of our friendships in these verses. Maybe that will cause us to be even more grateful for the friends we have, or perhaps we'll see something difficult about friendship here. And if we're really honest, we might measure up how good a friend we are compared to David and Jonathan. Now, over the years, there's been some discomfort in theological circles about the friendship between David and Jonathan. And I wonder if part of that is because a really good, sacrificial friendship like the one they had is just so challenging to us that we need to explain it away in some other way. David and Jonathan set the bar so high for friendship, don't they, that perhaps it can't, we can't help but suggest, well, there must have been something more to it than just friendship. And yet I think we miss something if we go down this road. So let's be brave enough to look at this friendship and what it might tell us about our own relationships. So let's look at verse 1. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one spirit with David and he loved him as himself. Now before we start looking at this verse, I think it's helpful for us to think about the unlikely context for this friendship. David, the upstart shepherd boy who has just seriously peed off his brothers by coming down to the battle scene. I mean, if you look at the language between David and his brothers, it's literally, what are you doing here? And David responds with, what have I done now? I mean, you could hear it now, couldn't you? He's really annoyed them because there they are, all in fear and trembling against Goliath, which I think you heard about last week or the week before. And then worse than that, he stomps up this upstart kid and kills Goliath. Not in a big glorious way, but in a really humiliating way with the tools of his shepherding life. And is able to give all the glory to God. He has shamed them on every level, hasn't he? So this young lad is now an instant celebrity, and after talking with Saul, who's kind of checked out his credentials, where have you come from, he's been moved into the palace. And if David's brothers have peed off with him, how much more should Jonathan be? The king's son. If anyone was going to kill Goliath, it should have been Saul, and if it wasn't going to be Saul, Jonathan should have been wheeled on to do that. And yet David has usurped both of those positions and is the instant celebrity and favourite. And I think it's good for us to remember how difficult that could have been, that should have been for Jonathan. And yet, how does he respond? He instantly responds with loving friendship, loving him better than himself. Now, we know very little about Jonathan, but what we do know tells us that he was a very humble and gracious man. Most people would have been threatened by David's popularity, and Saul famously is, isn't he? And yet Jonathan sees something in David he loves, and so gives up his place easily in the public's affection. And he literally gives David the life that should have been his. I wonder how sacrificial we are with our friends. I'm sure that we would all want the best for our friends, but what if that best came at our personal expense, like it did for Jonathan? What if we had to stand by and see our friend receive all the glory and acclaim that perhaps should have been ours? I think that would test most friendships, even if they've been friends for a very long time. And yet this is where David and Jonathan's friendship started. And in the passage we heard read from John, Jesus talks about friendship, and he sets the bar pretty high too. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You know, there's more than one way of laying down your life for your friend, isn't there? Jonathan gives up all his rights, all his popularity, all his position as the heir apparent, the king's son. He just makes way, gently, quietly, for David. He gives up his life for David. Now, of course, Jesus is preparing his friends for his sacrifice when he says this teaching about friendship and how we are called to be God's friends. But there's a challenge here for us too. Now, this verse is often quoted at military funerals, isn't it, where people have in fact given their lives to save their friends. And it's something we honour, quite rightly so. And yet most good friendships have grown in daily, weekly, monthly, smaller sacrifices over the years. The small times when we've had to just make way for our friend. The small times when we've had to make allowances for them not being at their best. The small times when we've chosen not to take offence and to love them anyway. And the many, many times when those friends have had to do that for us. The choice to prefer each other, to love one another as we love ourselves, is not just for heroes. It's for all of us. In fact, it is what Jesus calls us all to do. We're going to worship again and sing a song that reminds us of the friendship that Jesus gives us. What a friend I've found. Jesus, we thank you that when we think about our friends, that there is no friend greater or closer or more loving than you. And if we've lost sight of the precious gift of that friendship that you offer, pray that we would reconnect with it today and just revel in the fact that you ask us to be your friends too. Amen. So we've seen a very beautiful picture, but there's also some slightly more chilling stuff in this story, isn't there? The next verse from Samuel says this: "From that day Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family." Now, if Jonathan's friendship with David is worth emulating, Saul's version of friendship is depressingly familiar and a bit sinister. Having quizzed David about his family in the previous chapter, Saul decides to keep David close. Very close. Now, this one verse doesn't quite tell us of the paranoia that is revealed in the rest of the chapter, but it still rings alarm bells, doesn't it? When we hear it. It doesn't sound quite right. Even if Saul wasn't jealous at this point, he is certainly being very controlling. And he, of course, has all the power. He is king after all. But by refusing to let David go home and see his family, he is virtually keeping him a hostage in his court. Now, I don't suppose many of us have been held hostage by a toxic friendship, but many of us will have experienced the discomfort of a friend who needs to control us. Perhaps this has been expressed in a very demanding approach to our time, or even standing in the way of other relationships. Perhaps like Saul, those friends have had mental health problems and there's been a sense of duty of care in the friendship. As a minister, you end up with quite a lot of those, and they can be very difficult to manage. Whatever the basis for the relationship, the truth we see in David's relationship with Saul is that nothing kills a friendship quicker than envy. Saul keeps David where he can see him, but his motives quickly get driven by envy, don't they? So much so that by the end of this very chapter, Saul is trying to kill David. Now, envy can spring up at any time, and it is so destructive. If you're suffering with being envious of a friend, then can I urge you, this is something to take to God straight away. Don't let it fester, because it will rob you of joy just as it did Saul. But what if you're the one being envied? What can we do? I have discovered to my cost that this is really difficult to navigate. And if we find ourselves in this kind of relationship, we need to do the one thing that might have given Saul and David's friendship a chance, which was to give it some space. It can be really hard to walk away from someone who seems to need us, and yet sometimes it can be the kindest thing to do. Godly friendships do not rely on coercive control or guilting people into spending time, and they certainly don't get built on envy for each other. And if we find ourselves in a relationship like this, then we need to ask ourselves, is this what God would want? Is this the kind of friend Jesus calls us to be? In that passage from John, Jesus says, I no longer call you servants, because a servant doesn't know what his master's business is. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything that I've learned from my Father, I've made known to you. You know, our friendship with Jesus, with God, is the ultimate power relationship, isn't it? And yet here Jesus is giving away all the power. He's giving away all the control. He's saying, you're not my servants, you're my friends, and I'm going to share everything with you and be open with you and invite you in. This friendship Jesus offers us is one of openness and generosity. It isn't controlling or power-seeking. Jesus offers to share everything with us as his friends. I find that totally mind-blowing. And how often do we withhold things from him? Our deepest, dearest friend, the only person in the world who really understands us, actually better than we understand ourselves. And yet we go through the absolute nonsense of trying to hide things from him, don't we? Trying to hold things back from him. We're going to sing a hymn now which reminds us of the foolishness of that. What a friend I have in Jesus. He wants to share all those things with us. And this hymn was written by someone who had experienced incredible loss and yet found comfort in his friendship with Jesus, didn't withhold anything from Jesus. So let's stand together and just offer up ourselves again to Jesus in this hymn. Let's sit down. Yes, Jesus, we thank you that we can take everything to you in prayer. Forgive us for the times when we try to hold on to things and keep control of things. Remind us that there is no safer place than in the arms of your friendship. Amen. Well, the third verse reminds us that this is a covenant friendship, and Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Now, it can seem as though this friendship between David and Jonathan is a bit one way, but this verse tells us that that wasn't the case. David and Jonathan make a covenant with each other. And what we learn later on in their story is that they have promised to always honour each other's families. Jonathan has a real sense that because his father has gone a bit off line with God and the kingship is going to move to David, he has a real sense that he's not going to be around. And so he asks David for a covenant to look after each other's families. And in fact, we see the beautiful outworking of that covenant much later in David's life when he had become king and Jonathan had been killed in battle. So I'm going to read some words to you from 1 Kings. Chapter 9. David asked, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" There's real pain in that question, isn't there? Real angst. And the reply was, "Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba, and they summoned him to appear before David. And the king said to him, 'Are you Ziba?' 'At your service,' he replied. The king asked, 'Is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?' Ziba answered the king, 'There is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet.' 'Where is he?' the king asked. Ziba answered, 'He is at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo-debar.' So King David had him brought from Lo-debar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, 'Mephibosheth.' 'At your service,' he replied. 'Don't be afraid,' David said to him, 'for I will surely show kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table.' So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons." You know, this poor guy, the last remnant of Saul and Jonathan's family, crippled in his feet, so not really able to run away or, fight for himself, must have thought, "I'm being invited to the palace so that David can really get rid of everybody." And yet what was offered was so beautiful, wasn't it? David honoured his covenant to Jonathan. This was a two-way street as far as this friendship was concerned. And for friendship to really thrive, there has to be giving and taking on both sides. In all of our lives, there may be times when we have to give or take a bit more from each other due to circumstances. And the beginning of David and Jonathan's friendship demanded a lot more of Jonathan than it did of David. But David took his side of the relationship seriously and actively sought out Mephibosheth to keep his promise to Jonathan. I wonder if there are friends in our lives that we have perhaps taken more of our fair share from. Perhaps we have felt taken for granted by some of our friends. Our earthly friendships often fall short of what we would want. But God still calls us and equips us to love as he loved us. Jesus said, "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you." This is a tall order, but the first step towards this kind of mutual friendship is to accept the love offered to us. The covenant God makes with us is one where he has made all the sacrifices and only requires our love in return. It's an invitation to join him at the table as an honoured guest, just as Mephibosheth was at David's table. And perhaps we need to hear that invitation again. We're going to prepare to meet around the table that Jesus invites us to meet around. And as we do that, I've asked Alan to sing a song which is based in this story of Mephibosheth, but it is about the table that we meet around. It's called Carried to the Table. Mephibosheth would have been carried to the table every day to be invited to David's table to be honoured as the son of the king. we might not be crippled in that way, but we have things that cripple us in life. The sin that binds us, the stuff that makes us not able to join the table. And yet, Jesus carries us to the table. He invites us to be here. So let's prepare for communion as we listen to this song.
The words will be on the screen, and do feel free to join in if you pick it up.